Throughout history, there have been many great video game controller designs. Some played it safe, while others were experimental. Some of them failed to make much of an impact, while others changed the world. However, there is one controller that is truly unique, truly the greatest of them all. The Nintendo 64 controller. Yeah, this thing is strange, to say the least. The button layout is completely different compared to most other controllers. The control stick is very weird, it's all plasticky and it's kind of easy to damage. And of course it has 3 handles for some reason. Did they expect the average player to have a 3rd hand or something? Honestly, as bizarre as the design is, I think the controller isn't that bad. It has a lot of charm. I think that holding it in different positions, depending on the game, is a unique concept that most future controllers didn't really borrow. Most Nintendo 64 games are also designed with these positions in mind, so you won't need to move your hands across the controller very often. Of course, that only applies to Nintendo 64 games. What would happen if you tried to play something else with it? In late 2021, Nintendo released a new wireless version of the Nintendo 64 controller, designed to be used for the Switch Online service's Nintendo 64 games. This works very well. Playing these games with their original controller feels very natural, especially compared to other controllers. You can still use it for other games though, you aren't limited to just these apps. Much like the GameCube controller, you will quickly see that there are very few apps and games that recognize it as the Nintendo 64 controller. Instead, most games will just think that you're using a Pro controller, even though the home menu says otherwise. As a result, many games won't be very playable. Sometimes it does work though, and it might even be fun to play with the Nintendo 64 controller. That's usually not the case, but it should be fun to talk about anyway. Before getting into the main part of the video, it's definitely important to cover what the button mapping situation is. A, B, L, R start, the D-pad, and the control stick all register as their modern counterparts. The C buttons function as the right stick, which is pretty weird sometimes. The Z button is mapped to ZL. There are also 3 additional buttons at the very top that weren't on the original controller. A home button, a screenshot button, and a ZR button. The placement is a little weird, but they work well enough, and it's nice to be able to exit a game this way. Needing to switch controllers to exit a game was pretty annoying in the GameCube video. That's nice and all, but we're missing a few inputs. There's no substitute for the analog stick buttons, Y, X, or minus. Not having the stick buttons isn't the end of the world, but without the other face buttons, we're going to be in big trouble. There isn't any way to reassign button mappings either, so you're just going to be stuck with what the games give you. Alright, now for the main event. As I go through all of the games that I tried, I'll be giving each one a rating, which will determine its spot on a tier list that I'll show at the end of the video. S tier is for the very few games that actually recognize and fully support the Nintendo 64 controller. Everything else treats it like a Pro controller. To my knowledge, there are only 3 pieces of software worthy of the coveted S tier ranking, so I may as well talk about them right now. Of course, the Nintendo 64 Switch Online apps fully support the thing. I mentioned that before. The other game is Super Mario 64 and Super Mario 3D All-Stars. I still don't own this game because Nintendo is a very silly company. If you use the N64 controller, a few things will be different. In the NSO apps, the UI will change a little bit as a neat bonus. The main color scheme switches from red to gray, and the generic menu noises are changed to Mario 64 sound effects. In the case of both the NSO apps and 3D All-Stars, the button used to open the system menu is also changed to ZR, so there's no need to switch to a different controller when you want to do that. That's it. That's everything in S tier. It's a little unfortunate, but I get it. A tier is for games that fully function with the controller, aside from maybe a couple of small setbacks. A game in B tier may have some bigger problems with the controls, but it'll still largely be playable. C tier is for games that are technically possible to beat with the controller, but you'll be missing out on a lot, and you'll probably hate it. Finally, F tier is for all of the many games that are impossible to play. Whether it be now or later, you will run into problems that are too big to ignore, and you'll be blocked off from making progress. With all of that out of the way, it's time to talk about Smash Bros. Smash Ultimate lets you fully customize your button mapping, so I made a setting that fully replicates the control scheme of the original N64 game. All I had to do was switch the right stick to jump, I didn't have to change anything else. This feels alright. I don't think the faster pace of Ultimate suits the controller very well. The stick just isn't up to the job. I definitely won't be playing with it again anytime soon. It's fine though, and it's cool that you can play this way. A tier. Mario Kart seems to work well with just about any controller, so it was no surprise that it worked again here. Both the D-pad and the control stick allow you to steer, so you can choose to hold either of the left or middle grips depending on how you're feeling. The only problems I ran into involve the X button. Without it, you can't look backwards while driving, which you may find particularly useful if you're a true Mario Kart gamer. I'm not, so I was okay. You also can't do a few things in the online menu, like switching your kart and driver, or telling everybody how you're definitely using tilt controls. It doesn't matter that much though, Mario Kart can go in A tier. We've been pretty successful in our efforts with the N64 controller so far, but not for much longer. It's time to try our luck with the Pikmin series. Pikmin 1 isn't the worst experience in the world. The only functions you're really missing out on are dismissing your Pikmin and ending a day early, which are helpful but not strictly necessary. The main problem I had was using the Pikmin swarm. To do this, I had to reach all the way over to the left side of the N64 controller and use the C buttons. It's pretty uncomfortable, especially if you want to move around while doing so. It's definitely possible though, and I got used to it quickly, so I think Pikmin 1 is fine in B tier. The controls in Pikmin 2 are for the most part pretty similar to the first game, but there's a brand new addition to gameplay in the form of your second captain, Louie. You switch between him and Olimar by pressing the Y button, which we don't have. You can make it through much of the game without swapping captains, but there are some puzzles and enemies that'll be much more difficult to solve or defeat without it, if it's even possible. You also won't even be able to make it through the first day without pressing the Y button, so Pikmin 2 will be going in F tier. Much like its predecessor, Pikmin 3 does not fare very well when using the N64 controller. Moving around is an absolute pain for some reason. If you look at the footage I recorded, you can see that Alf keeps stuttering and stopping when I try to turn. This is very annoying. I'm not totally sure why this is. I went to the calibration menu to check if the control stick just didn't have the full range necessary or something, but everything seemed to be fine. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy and the movement problems were my fault, but it did happen again with a different game. That aside, you also can't open the Copad menu. This will severely hinder your Dandori capabilities and more importantly prevent you from learning how to cook an armored mod hat. That alone earns this game a spot at the very bottom of F tier. It gets worse though. You can't get your Pikmin to charge, which makes getting them to carry things hard and getting them to fight things harder. You also can't use the little shortcut menu that opens up when pressing Y. As a result, you can't use a spray, dismiss your squad, or switch to a different captain. Well, you can swap captains, but that would involve losing all of your health first. That's very dumb. Imagine having to die every time you need to solve one of these puzzles. Alright guys, I got you over there. I don't know, I guess I'll just die now. These problems make the game very hard to play. I'm pretty sure there are times during the main story where it's impossible to switch characters by dying, so that's a pretty easy F tier. Pikmin 4 is the worst of the bunch. Without a Y button you can't get on Ochi at all. Even if you could, you won't be able to jump or charge, so there are many caves and treasures that you'll never be able to access. You also won't be able to open the system menu normally, but that's not as bad as not being able to jump. Pikmin 4 will also be going into F tier. Honestly, there are too many F tier worthy games that aren't worth talking about individually. I'll try to speed through all of them quickly so we can get to the more interesting stuff. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze has two control styles. The main one has grab functions mapped to the triggers, while important abilities like the roll are mapped to X and Y. The only other style just swaps those mappings around, so you won't have access to both of those abilities at the same time. Mario 3D World requires you to press X or Y to run. Unlike other Mario games, there's no way to switch the run button to B, so you're kind of stuck moving slowly. You also won't be able to use any power-up abilities. Super Mario Odyssey is in a similar situation. You can't map the cap throw to B, so you can't throw Cappy and therefore can't do a whole lot. You won't even be able to make it past the first area on a new save. Metroid Dread just doesn't work at all. You have to press Y to shoot and X to melee counter. Without these, you can't do damage. You also can't open any doors, so I was just stuck in this save room with no way to get out while getting footage. If that doesn't earn this game a spot in F tier, I don't know what does. Metroid Prime was a little sad. In many ways, the classic controls suit the N64 controller very well. Using the D-pad and the C buttons to switch visors and beams makes a lot of sense, and it feels very natural. There's also no need to reach over to the L or ZR buttons at any point, which makes playing the game pretty comfortable. Unfortunately, you can't use the morph ball or the missiles without the X and Y buttons, so there's not much you can do after a certain point. The movement controls in Super Mario RPG are pretty standard, and the lack of buttons doesn't usually get in the way there. Battles are a different story. You won't be able to access anything but normal attacks and the strategy menu. No items or spells allowed. These options aren't even available outside of battle since the game requires you to use the shortcut menus for some reason. You could probably take on most enemies in the game with normal attacks alone, but it would be pretty tough and a few bosses might be too difficult. There's also the fact that you can't use triple moves. This isn't necessary to win in most fights, but I think the tutorial might force you to use it, so you'd just be soft-locked. I was kind of hopeful that the Thousand Year Door would be playable with the N64 controller, considering how the first game in the series was on the Nintendo 64. Unfortunately, it's not possible. You can't use partner or paper abilities like the airplane without the X and Y buttons, which are absolutely necessary to progress. The Origami King is so close to being playable, but it's not quite there. I couldn't activate the 1000-fold arms, so I got stuck right here. You also can't use items in the field. That's not good. The Link's Awakening remake requires you to equip progression items to the X and Y buttons. There are once again no extra control options to speak of, so you're not going to get very far. Skyward Sword is better in some ways, but it's still not very playable. You can't stab, roll, raise your shield, or charge on your left wing. You also won't be able to open the map or skip cutscenes. Most of this is necessary at some point. Kirby and the Forgotten Land was close to being fully playable, but it's impossible to drop copy abilities without intentionally getting hit several times. This also means it's not possible to exit mouthful mode, so I was just stuck as a vending machine while gathering footage. Luigi's Mansion 3 is better with the N64 controller than with the GameCube controller, but it's still an F tier. You can't summon Luigi, so there are many puzzles that you'll be unable to solve unless you're playing in 2-player mode or something. Alright, that's all of them. With everything that absolutely doesn't work out of the way, it's time to talk about things that do work. Kind of. I'll start by talking about all of the games with proper control options from the last video. Portal is definitely playable if you remap the controls first. Now, this isn't ideal. You will have to reach all the way over to the L button sometimes, and that's not very fun. The C buttons are also just kind of terrible when it comes to camera controls. This is a problem most of the time, but it's most noticeable in first-person games like Portal. Overall, though, Portal definitely works. You could beat the game this way. I'll put it in A tier, I guess. Minecraft is another game that's largely played in first person, so have fun with that. I honestly wish there was a way to recreate something like the 1.2 controls from GoldenEye. That would be great. I'd love to have that for games like Portal and Minecraft. Unfortunately, it's not possible. Minecraft also just requires a lot of buttons to map actions to. You could probably come up with some kind of manageable control scheme, but I didn't feel like it. B tier. Celeste is thankfully a 2D platformer instead of a first-person game. There are no camera controls to speak of. After tweaking the button mapping a little bit, I set out to obtain the legendary Moonberry using the power of the Nintendo 64 controller. I did get the Moonberry, but I had to switch to something else after a couple of hours. The last room was too tough for the poor thing, and I needed to use the Pro Controller if I wanted to actually accomplish it. I did manage to make a lot of progress before that though, so Celeste is definitely going in A tier. I tried playing Hyrule Warriors again. It was miserable. Because the N64 controller lacks buttons, coming up with a decent control scheme for this game was tough. I had to ensure that whatever I put together would allow me to access all of the most important functions, but I had to give up some pretty helpful actions as well. Ultimately, this is what I came up with. It's not great, but I tried. It ultimately renders the lock-on, guard, and magic commands inaccessible. This makes combat very frustrating. Hyrule Warriors is still possible to play without these though, so it can be free from F-tier prison. It's still in C-tier though, that's not much better. The last of those games that I played in the GameCube controller video was the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection, and I was actually very excited to try out the N64 controller on this one. You see, Street Fighter is a 6-button fighting game. How many face buttons does this controller have? That's right. It's 6. It's perfect. If I can just change the controls real quick, then... Oh. You can't map the right stick to anything in this game.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I was afraid of this before trying, but I actually really hoped that it would work. Games like Street Fighter don't translate very well to a normal controller, but the N64 controller seemed like a perfect fit. It's not possible to map buttons in the way that I was hoping though. Man. There are just barely enough buttons to map to each of the attack inputs, but it won't be very fun. Oh, what could have been? C tier. The Switch Online apps are next on our radar. Of course, the Nintendo 64 apps are fully playable with this controller, and they're honestly better that way, but the other ones are a different story. When it comes to NES, Game Boy, or GBA games, it really depends on if the game requires the use of the select button or not. Many don't need it, but some games like Metroid absolutely do. When it comes to Super Nintendo and Genesis games, many of them require the use of the X or Y buttons. There's still no remapping options in any of these apps for some stupid reason, so there's no way to solve these problems. A few games do have pretty simple controls. Others like Super Metroid allow you to change button mappings within the game itself, so those are definitely playable, but many are not so fortunate. As for the original NSO games, these work much better. Tetris allows you to change your controls if you aren't satisfied with them, but I think the default settings translate perfectly to this controller. I honestly use it most of the time while playing Tetris 99, since it has a much better D-pad than the Pro Controller or the Joy-Cons. F-Zero is also a smooth experience. There aren't control options in this one for some reason, but they work pretty well anyway, so it's not the end of the world. You can't brake though, that's kind of unfortunate. You also have to reach across the controller to slide left or spin, depending on how you're holding it. Overall though, it's still pretty solid. I'll put Tetris in A tier, while F-Zero can go to B tier. I again won't be ranking the other classic game apps. That would either require me to rank the games within them individually or come up with a more general rating. I don't want to do either of those, so they won't be going on the tier list. I'll probably knock out all of the Xenoblade games now. Most of these aren't very fun with the N64 controller, but they're certainly playable to some extent. Definitive Edition is probably the most enjoyable of the bunch when it comes to combat. You have access to every button you need to fight enemies. You'll just have to move your hands around a lot. Things get very weird outside of combat. The biggest frustration is definitely the fact that you can't open the main menu with X to change arts and equipment and party members and stuff. That's a pretty big deal in an RPG like Xenoblade. So why isn't this game an F tier? Well, there are some moments throughout the story where the characters in your team shift around. In these moments, this little window pops up and you'll have the option to open the main menu and do things there before the gameplay begins again. These stop happening after a certain point, and they aren't very frequent in general, so it may be tough a lot of the time. I just think it's a cool idea for a challenge run. There are definitely other problems though. You can't use fast travel, which is pretty bad. It's not necessary in this game, and I'm pretty sure you can make it through the entire main story by just walking to where you need to go, but it's going to be really freaking annoying. Xenoblade 2 doesn't have any menu problems. It does have combat problems. In this game in Xenoblade 3, an art is used by pressing the face button that's assigned to it. We only have access to one of the buttons that an art can be assigned to. That's really bad. So yeah, I'm basically useless. I can't charge blade specials very quickly, so combos will be very slow. It's definitely possible to play this way though, it's just miserable. I also had some weird problems with movement like I did in Pikmin 3. That's fun. Xenoblade 3 is in the same situation as 2 when it comes to combat. It's also in a similar situation to 1 when it comes to the pause menu. You can open different parts of the menu though, you just have to assign it to a shortcut thing. That's annoying, but at least it's possible to access everything. Combat is actually much more bearable in 3. You have some arts that you can use with the D-pad, and you can switch characters if you really have nothing else to do at the moment. I was able to beat this super boss pretty easily with the N64 controller, which could not be said about the GameCube controller. There are some other problems. You have to hold the X button to skip cutscenes, which isn't great for people like me who have played the game before. I think you also need to press the X button during some of the tutorials. That should probably get the game into F tier, but it's crowded there already, and it's just a simple controller swap once or twice in the early game. All of the Xenoblade games aren't great with the N64 controller. While they're all definitely possible to complete, they're going to be a struggle. C tier across the board. Now we're going to talk about some Mario games, and also Yoshi. Hopefully the RPGs didn't scare too many people off. Super Mario Bros. Wonder works very well with the N64 controller. You just have to go to the settings and change the run button to B instead of Y. You won't be able to use reserve items, but all of the other gameplay functions are still possible, and reserve items aren't really that important. A tier. Super Mario Maker 2 also lets you alter the running and jumping buttons. This makes playing levels a very enjoyable experience. There aren't any abilities in any of the game styles that you'll need a missing button for, so the platforming content is very much playable. Level creation, not so much. You can access just about every menu, but it's kind of annoying. You also can't playtest the level you're making. I really don't get this. The play button is right there, next to the stuff that I can access. Why can't I just manually select it from the menu? Why do I absolutely need to press the minus button? Mario Maker feels kind of weird, since half of the game is miserable with the N64 controller, while the other half is perfectly fine. I'll just split the difference and put it in B tier. Mario Party Superstars is largely playable with the N64 controller. Unfortunately, there are a couple of minigames that require the use of the X or Y buttons. If you don't end up with one of these, you're good. If you do, prepare to lose. Since the game is mostly playable though, I'll put it in B tier. Yoshi's Crafted World has some pretty simple controls, much like the Mario games. You'll just have to leave your controller settings at type A, since both of the other options map important stuff to Y, and you don't want that. A tier. We're almost at the end now, but I have a few more games to cover first. ARMS is one of those games that lets you adjust the controls. You have to switch to a different controller to do this, but you should be good after that. The N64 controller has enough buttons to map actions to in this game, so you'll definitely be able to come up with something that works. A tier. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are the only standalone Zelda releases on the Switch that are actually playable with the N64 controller. That might be stretching the definition of playable a little bit. Without an X button, you'll have problems when it comes to jumping and running. There is a setting that lets you choose which of these actions will be set to the B button, so it's still possible to jump and sprint. You just won't have access to both of those options at any given moment. The much bigger problem is the fact that you can't attack normally with melee weapons. That's bad. Oh, that's very bad. So these games should be in F tier, right? Wrong. You see, the modern Zelda games give players a lot of freedom in how they approach combat. You can take out pretty much any enemy however you want. I really don't see any reason to believe that you couldn't make it through either of these games by only shooting arrows, throwing weapons, and using Sheikah runes or Zonai abilities. There may be a handful of shrines that you won't be able to finish, but those aren't necessary for completion. Now, it will be rough. Combat will be difficult and tedious. You won't be able to fast travel in Breath of the Wild. You'll need to learn how to swap your B button controls on the fly. I may be stupid and these games are actually impossible without these abilities. I think I'm right though, and that's what matters. If this challenge is in fact impossible, then I am sorry for being misleading. I think it's possible though, and it's funny, so I will be putting both of these games in C tier instead of F. And that's everything. These are all of the games that I tested. It's a little disappointing how many of them are in F tier, but it's understandable. I probably won't be doing another one of these videos. It was fun for the GameCube and N64 controllers, but I doubt it would be very interesting for the NES, Super Nintendo, or Genesis controllers. Those don't have a control stick, so that severely limits the number of games that could possibly be playable. Maybe I'll do it if I completely run out of other video ideas or I suddenly think it would be amusing, but I don't expect that to happen anytime soon, if ever. For now, at least, this little series has come to an end. Hopefully it was fun while it lasted. I'm not sure how to end the video, so, bye!